and I had tickets. And I wasn't even driving. The fellow who wrote this song, You Light Up My Life, Joseph Brooks, 73 years old, was awaiting trial on charges of sexually assaulting more than a dozen women, has been found dead of an apparent suicide in his Manhattan apartment. He had planned to go to lunch with a friend, left the door ajar, killed himself, put a bag over his head. The friend found him dead. Well, he's at it again. The California preacher Harold Camping is saying that his prophecy that the world would end on Saturday, well, he was off by 5 months. Now, remember how he cut it in two? He said May 21st, Judgment Day, millions will be taken. October 21st, those left behind, that probably includes me, maybe you, we're going to all die when the planet goes. Well, now he's saying, I was wrong about the May 21st date. It's October 21st. Folks, we got 5 more months of this. And I'll be back in a moment as we talk with Sir Charles Schultz III. He says there's life on Mars, and NASA just might agree.
Hot Talk 560 KSFO.
If you happen to be by a computer, just go to coast-to-coast-am.com, take a look at our highlights reel. Take a look at the Mars fossils, pictures that Sir Charles Schultz has sent us. They are absolutely remarkable. We've had them on the program before, but when you look at them close up, you realize that there's something out there. They're fossils on Mars. Sir Charles Schultz, of course, worked at Martin Marietta Aerospace for 10 years on weapon systems and computer-based automatic test equipment. He wrote the nuclear EMP test software for the Pershing II missile system as well. Knighted and received a long-term grant for his present research in robotics and artificial intelligence. Here he is back on Coast to Coast, Sir Charles Schultz. Charles, how are you?
Doing very well, George, and how are you?
I'm doing fine. Great pictures again. The more I look at them, the more I just simply say Mars was loaded with life at one time. And
well,
still
in my
may
mind,
be.
There's no question about it. Many, many more people are coming to that view. And just recently I was very fortunate to be interviewed for WLTX television in Columbia, and they did quite a nice spot on the fact that they are in agreement with me.
What's NASA say about all this?
Well, the thing is, it's for anybody to question it when you see the evidence. And I think the real issue is, when will NASA finally admit it? You know, they've got a number of very interesting things going on. And, of course, you know that there was a fellow who discovered what they felt was life in a meteorite about a month and a half ago. And, of course, they said that was an incorrect conclusion. So at this point, I think it's really an interesting spot that they're in, because both Russia and China, as you know, are going to be sending missions soon. Now, the interesting thing about the present Curiosity rover, which will be launched at the end of this year, is it's supposed to be carrying a new advanced color camera and imager that was being created by James Cameron and his team. They were hoping to get full-color 3D images of Mars and actually send some video back so we could see the things very much like an IMAX movie. Unfortunately, as of April 28th, that camera has been canceled because they had some imaging problems in the hardware. Yes,
I was looking forward to that, Charles.
Well, I know that many people did, and they were looking at the zoom system in it, and they were unable to get the mechanisms to work properly in the period of time they had. They were going to have to disassemble it and make some changes, and there really wasn't enough time to get the thing reassembled and flight ready. So the unfortunate fact is the new full-zoom, full-color movie camera has been canceled for the Curiosity rover.
At what point do you think NASA holds a news conference, shows your pictures, or uses some like that they have, and says, all right, they're fossils on Mars, you know, the oceans were laden with all kinds of life, that's the way it is? Are they going to ever say that?
I think it's going to happen very shortly. You know, in the interview that I did, they directly questioned Charlie Bolden, who is the chief administrator of NASA, and he said he really didn't know. He'd like to be able to say yes, but he couldn't. And when Phil Christensen, who's one of the lead rover scientists, was asked, he said it's not out of the question. And that's the closest they've come to actually admitting at this point. They have said in the past now that they...
You there, Charles?
In some parts of Mars. Little by little, they're coming around with a view that, yes, there had to have been life. And the most telling statement is, in a previous interview, Charlie Bolton said that the new rover is going to have such an impact, they're going to rewrite the history books in 18 months. Well, it's interesting because how would they know what they're going to discover, that they're going to rewrite those books, unless they already had the answers in hand? That's a very, very interesting statement.
Well, interesting indeed. Charles, you've been doing this work now for a number of years. What got you involved in it? Did you see something and you said, oh, my gosh, I've got to study this?
Well, yes, I've always had an interest in Mars, but I was building a rover that could be operated by schools and institutions of education here on Earth over the Internet. And to make it realistic, I was analyzing their data, all the information they were sending back at the very beginning of the Mir mission. And that was when I made the discoveries that I have that I've published and written about. And it was very clear that this was something very unusual, completely out of the ordinary. And that was what really got me on the trail of this back in February of 2004.
And you've kept at it, of course. You've got a lot of support. Others are out there. You know, we've got Richard C. Hoagland, who's done his own work, separate from yours, of course, on things that he thinks he has found on Mars as well. Are you getting some mainstream scientists to back you up now?
We are. It's slowly starting to happen. And again, as NASA is starting to say, yes, we know there's water, and they also released a lot of information about the methane findings a couple of years ago, which are starting to look very interesting. Methane is being released into the atmosphere of Mars, and they haven't exactly admitted that it's from biological sources, but it changes with the change in seasons. So this is a very clear indication that something is happening that has to do with the seasons that's creating what appears to be an organic material, methane gas in the atmosphere. So that in itself is a very strong piece of evidence that there could very well still be organisms alive in the soil. And that brings us to the most important point. NASA is still hot on the path of returning Mars samples to the Earth for analysis. This, in my opinion, is an extremely dangerous course of action to follow, because any life that existed on the planet will have had offspring. And at this present day, it's very, very strongly possible that there are still fungus, bacteria, and other organisms in the soil. So returning a sample of that nature to the Earth would be an extremely foolish thing to do, because any of those organisms would be things that we have no resistance to whatsoever.
It's shades of the Andromeda strain, Charles. Good luck with your work, and let's stay in touch. And when I come back in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM, I'll give you the numbers, because we'll have open lines, and I know you've got lots to talk about.
Hot Talk 560 KSFO.
And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie, and we've got open lines for you before James Van Prague joins us at the top of the hour. Let's go to the phones. We'll go to Lawrence, Kansas. Kevin's with us on Coast to Coast. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, George. Thank you for having me on the show
Sure
again.
Thing.
Hey, I have some family in Vancouver. I just kind of wanted to say have a happy Victoria Day in Vancouver.
Super.
Out to them. But, if you remember last week I called, and I was an idiot to think that the rapture would actually happen.
Yes, you and your friends, and you had said you would call back if you were still here.
Right.
Here you are. And now, let me ask you this, Kevin. First of all, how do you feel? I'm not rubbing this in, because I want you to know I respect you for your views and what everybody thinks. And if you actually believe these words from camping, so be it. I mean, far be it from me to say anything about that. But how do you feel now?
Honestly, I'm pretty devastated. Because deep down in my heart, I really thought this would happen. But as Saturday grew later in the afternoons, it started to feel like only like a solid 7 chance of anything actually happening.
How did you think you're going to be taken? Did you feel as if you were going to just disappear? Which I think you just have. You got raptured a little late, I think. Let's go to Rick in Russellville, Arkansas. Welcome to the program. Hi, Rick.
Hey, George. How's it going?
Okay, I'm fine, thanks.
Yeah, about that, the rapture deal, it talks about it in the sixth seal in Revelations, and it talks about the earthquake supposed to be, worldwide, something the world's never seen. So just an earthquake here or there isn't really what it's going to be.
That's right. And
it talks of actually people that don't believe it or what it is. It says it in 1 Thessalonians, like 4:16, it talks about it. But the other deal is that, with all the Earth changes and stuff, the cosmic rays, I think, is coming from the black hole. When we line up with it, I think we're going to get some supercharged more particles, and we're getting closer and closer to being lined up in there.
Well, you know what? Something's going on, even as Mitch Batras was telling us, and he believes it has a lot to do with the electromagnetic pulses around this planet. But something's changing here. I mean, we are in Earth cycles. There's no question about that. But it just seems to be so violent right now, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, we're down here. I'm just about 150 miles south of here, south of where Joplin was. We've been getting pounded down here for almost 2 months, flooding and tornadoes and storms just all the time. It's really incredible.
It does not stop. It just doesn't stop. Let's go to Paradise, California. First-time caller Greg's with us on Coast to Coast. Hey, Greg, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. Thank you for having me on. And I turned on the radio one night and just fell in love with the show ever since.
Perfect.
And I was just going to say, it was so weird. I have the sleep paralysis problem.
Okay.
And the first few times it happened, it was like, you can hallucinate. It felt like a presence was walking up on me. And it just was so scary. And then I turned on Coast to Coast one night, and you guys were talking about it. And then I was like, oh, my God, that's what it is. Thank you.
Many people go through this. They also some people have had what is called the old hag syndrome. And I don't know if we were talking about that night you tuned in. But this is where, like you were feeling in the beginning, a feeling of somebody in your room holding you down.
Exactly.
And they call it the old hag because people have said, this is this old gray-haired looking lady that comes and pounces on you and, you feel like you're suffocating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. It's like it only happens to me when I lay on my back. And then it's like I'll hallucinate if my brother's around, I'll be sitting there calling for him, and it feels like I'm yelling, but I'm not at all, I guess. And then I think he's standing right there. And then I finally come out of it after about 10 minutes, and then I'll say, were you in my room?
And it's a weird feeling. And you're wide awake when this is happening.
Yeah. And it was weird, too, because a couple weeks ago, a lady caller called in talking about it, and I was wanting to call in that night. And it was just so bizarre that she was talking about it. And like she was saying, it needs to be studied more because a lot of people, think that it's the devil and this and that, but it's just a really bizarre phenomenon. And, I just thank Coast to Coast, because I thought I was going crazy for a while.
Oh, no, you're not going nuts. It's there. It's a condition. It happens. It happens to people. It's frightening.